Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Well, above all, this biosocial perspective is necessary for the subject tonight of menstruation. Menstruation implies the discharge of blood and fluids from the uterus of reproductive age females, which is usually happening at monthly intervals, and the word is coming from the Latin mensis, for month. But as we heard from Chris a couple of lectures ago, I think, this root, me, has a connection to moon, to measurement, to man itself, to the idea of man as humans. So we can already read into that etymology the fact that menstruation is not just a biological fact, which undoubtedly is, but it is also extraordinarily rich in terms of its cultural and symbolic elaboration. So what I want to do is spend part of the time, the first half, looking at the actual biology of menstruation and why it's there at all, which is quite a puzzle. It looks on the face of it as an extremely wastely, costly procedure in terms of losing nutrients, tissue, blood. Why? What for? What is that purpose for? But also, the second half, I'm going to go on to consider menstruation as a cultural signal. It did not evolve as a signal. It evolved for other reasons, but it very quickly became not just a signal, but actually the signal which pivoted us into human culture. And I hope by the end I'll persuade you that actually there wouldn't have been any other signal. It had to be that one. As Levi-Strauss, we've heard about Levi-Strauss last week with Sleeping Beauty, but as he pinpointed, he focused on the incest taboo as this feature, this pivot between nature, the avoidance of incest, and culture, where rules about incest came into play, very particular rules. But rather in the same way, menstruation is a very material phenomenon that presents itself as an aspect of behaviour and an aspect of belief. It is the place, the location where Darwinian levels of analysis really link to the symbolic cultural world. So I'm going to start by looking at why it evolved, which species are actually known to menstruate, and what we can learn about it, as what's it for. So why it evolved? Well, it is found particularly in mammal species which have an extremely invasive form of placentation, the embedding of the placenta and the placenta's contiguity to the mother's bloodstream to extract nutrients. And this is just a block, it's not a brilliant picture, but it's giving you an idea of the degree to which, so you're looking from the umbilical cord, so the fetus is on this side, and the fetus is plugging in and mining into the arterial walls of the uterus, the mother's arteries. Now this form of fetus in a hemicorial placentation is not well behaved. It rips into the mother's arterial walls, it rewires them to channel straight into the mother's bloodstream, it goes deep into her surrounding tissues, raises them, pumps the arteries full of hormones to try and expand them to get suck the maximum nutrients and the quality of nutrients, because it raises insulin levels, so it gets maximum blood sugar from the mother. It's just taking all it can get. Okay, so this is bringing us to a model of menstruation that is looked at through maternal versus fetal conflict. Now, most people think of mothers and babies and pregnancy as this extraordinary system of harmony, but actually in there is this warfare, this tug of war, because there are significant conflicting interests. Okay, I've said hemicorial placentation, and we'll just have a look. Here is a nice little phylogeny of species, and you won't be able to see all the species names, species that actually menstruate. Okay, and it's evolved. This is giving us the places where it's likely to have evolved. So the pink bits are the evolution of menstruation, and we can see all the primates. So these are nearly all the New World, some maybe exceptions, Old World monkeys, and then great apes, and us. We are the champion menstruators. We menstruate quantities that the other guys hardly can. But it is detectable in nearly all the monkeys. Okay, but this is another one. Possibly it evolves here, or possibly twice there. These are bats. Chiroptera are bats. Okay, which is very interesting considering the extraordinary symbolism of bats in connection to menstruation in much mythology. And right over here is another very extraordinary creature. This is the elephant shrew branch. Okay, elephant shrews. Yeah, okay, whoa, okay. Now all of these guys are hemochorial placental mammals, but not all hemochorial placental mammals menstruate because, well, mice are, rabbits are, horses, more of rabbits later. Horses, there's an array, equids, rodents, etc. So there must be something, if we are to account for menstruation, there must be something more that brings it down to these particularly. And if anyone is looking for a PhD in this area, finding more out about bat reproduction will be teaching us a lot about menstruation. So that's a really good area to go into. Okay, so let's just talk about maternal fetal conflict, and I'll come back to what's special about these species, or what particular about these species. Now this idea, that actually down here is a reference for one of the key articles here if you're interested, and I can send that to you if you want to get in touch about it. Maternal fetal conflict theory was first generated by David Haig, in particular because he was trying to explain the extraordinary perils of human pregnancy. And why on earth should mother and fetus be in conflict? Well, they share 50% of each other's genes, okay, but then there's a whole other 50% coming from father that they don't share, and this puts it in a potential for conflict. From the mother's perspective, she wants to put all her investment pretty much equally shared, all things being equal, pretty equally shared amongst all her offspring. From the fetus's perspective, this is its one chance of life, and it doesn't really know if the mother's future offspring are going to be close siblings. It might be another dad. So the fetus, as far as it's concerned, grab as much and extract as much as possible from the mother. I've been describing already how it does this by literally tunneling into the mother's kind of flesh and blood, into the walls of the uterus, tapping straight into the bloodstream. But among the difficulties, well, morning sickness is a relatively benign and healthy aspect of pregnancy, but there are many aspects of pregnancy that are not so much. The fetus, as it becomes the embryo, as it becomes a fetus, has the capacity to send these hormones into the mother's bloodstream that are able to raise her blood pressure. So you will have raised blood pressure during pregnancies, some of you may be able to testify, and particularly this can get so dangerous that you run the risk of preeclampsia around birth. So this is a life-threatening condition. In addition to just raising blood pressure, which of course pushes more blood through the placental wall for the fetus to be nourished, in addition to blood pressure, the fetus can manipulate the mother's insulin levels and uses hormones to do that. So what is possible out of that is gestational diabetes, and for a mother who is diabetic anyway, this becomes a very serious and life-threatening condition. Okay, so there is a kind of evolutionary tug of war going on, and a bit of an arms race between mother and fetus happening during pregnancy. Now, if both sides are relatively healthy, that can kind of hold on. That works. That'll come out with probably a healthy outcome. But if one side or the other is for some reason compromised, health compromised, as I said, a mother perhaps who's diabetic, or for some reason the blood pressure is very dangerous, then things can go extremely badly wrong. And there are many beginnings of pregnancy that do not last very long. Many pregnancies, many implantations that do not survive during the first trimester. That is perfectly common and normal. From the mother's point of view, she can always, just start again. From the fetus's point of view, it can't. It is only one shot, and therefore the fetus is like hanging on in there for grim death. Okay, but what about how do we get to menstruation, and what is happening particularly with these species we've been talking about? So we've talked about pregnancy, but what happens in these hemocorial placental mammals is the mother is going to lose control of her bloodstream to this alien little blighter coming in there. But she tries to block that, she tries to clamp down on it, and the way she does it is with the endometrium, the inner lining of the womb. And this is actually an extraordinarily tough and dangerous organ for the fetus or the embryo that's attempting, the trophoblast that's attempting to implant. And this is again hugely counterintuitive for us. We think, well, that must be the most nurturing environment possible, but actually it is anything but nurturing. The endometrium is built up with thick and tough layers with a minimum a minimization of the blood vessels. The blood vessels squeeze, so the blood supply is limited as much as possible. Now, in many hemocorial placental mammals, like mice or rabbits or horses, they will only build up this thick, tough wall of the endometrium in the case of pregnancy. And this is a process known as decidulization of the endometrium. Only when there's an actual pregnancy. So they're trying to clamp down and limit the amount of actual transfer of nutrients. But in the case of these particular, all these monkeys and apes, these bats, these are known as having spontaneous decidulization. Now, what that means is the mother produces this very thick, very tough kind of skin of the endometrium, lining of the endometrium, irrespective of pregnancy. She's just getting ready for the invasion to occur, whatever happens. She's one step ahead of the fetus, trying to keep it under control. And then if there is not a successful implantation, then the progesterone is withdrawn, the hormone that establishes pregnancy, and menstruation occurs as a direct consequence of that, as a direct consequence of the loss of the progesterone. So menstruation is not as such an adaptation, but it is a direct consequence of this spontaneous decidulization, this spontaneous building up of the endometrium as a hostile environment. Now, what does that mean, that hostile environment? Of all the places in a woman's or a female placental hemocorial placental mammal's tract for a trophoblast to try to implant, the endometrium, the inside lining of the womb, is the hardest. It's like this, the endometrium is a kind of lethal testing ground. It's trying to push that, it's like an SAS obstacle course for that fetus. Now, why on earth does the mother do this? Well, we start to understand it when we see the species that are concerned, the monkeys and the apes and then ourselves, which I'm going to show more of in terms of human evolution. This is enormously costly for a mother. She's going to invest, she's going to go into this very difficult, dodgy pregnancy with this maternal fetal conflict, trade-offs between the mother and the fetus. She's got risks of life-threatening conditions. This is particularly the case for humans. And then she's got this long years ahead of investment in an offspring before it can become viable. This is going to cost her so much that she has absolutely no interest in this investment until she knows that she has the best possible fetus there to take through pregnancy and become and be born. So having an endometrium that is actually as tough an environment, as hostile an environment as it can be, makes perfect sense. even though however counterintuitive it is, it makes complete sense for that. So all of these spontaneous decidualization, hemocorial placental mammals, these are the ones that necessarily menstruate when they don't get pregnant, effectively. Now there's one other significant feature in this, which points to why it's these species also. And this is the factor of continuous receptivity. We've spoken about that, and I'm going to say a bit more about it in relation to hominins. But continuous receptivity in all these species implies the ability to have sex over a longer period of the cycle, the reproductive cycle, than just around ovulation, just around a sort of narrow estrus period. Now we are, again, the champion menstruators, but also the champion continuous sexual receptive females. We can have sex at any time of our cycle. So the pan species like bonobos and chimps have a long estrus period, quite a long estrus period, where they build up having sex with lots of males to the point of maximum fertility. Paniscus, the bonobos, have this very extended receptive period, lots of sex. They're famous for all their sex. But even some of the monkeys like langurs and others, they have an extended receptivity. Now, as I say, PhD in bat reproduction, finding out much more about the receptivity in these bat species would be a really interesting project. But they are said to be, at least one of these species is known to have an extended receptivity. Elephant shrews, not so sure, but they are also associated with this. So why does that matter? If we think of our rabbits, I like thinking about rabbits. Rabbits, a female rabbit gets mated by a male, has sex, and she ovulates in relation to that, induced ovulation. So this is an incredibly beautifully organized, it's so efficient. She's like ovulating. It's very hard for a female rabbit not to get pregnant. I mean, she will, because she just falls pregnant with the induced ovulation. It's all perfect timing, just happens. You hardly not get pregnant. For us, there's no such thing as, we don't ovulate every time we have sex with a man. This is quite clear. We are hiding ovulation from men as much as possible. There are very strong reasons why we should do that, which I'll go into. But it means that it's entirely possible for us to have sex at almost the diametrically opposite time of the cycle from our ovulation. It would even be conceivable that there could be old sperm or gametes floating around in the reproductive tract, achieving fertilizations a long way away from, over several days away from ovulation. Now what that raises is the possibility of chromosomal abnormalities. So in addition to all the difficulties of implantation of for the trophoplast and the embryo formation, in addition to risks like ectopic pregnancy, because implantation is actually easier outside endometrium, we have these raised possibilities of chromosomal abnormality. Okay, so what we're getting here is a landscape of the endometrium, which is a bit nightmarish, with all these potentially failed implantations in the wrong places, implantations that have pretty much failed and they're kind of just hanging on in there for grim death, but maybe dying, maybe weakly emitting signals that will disrupt the intrauterine environment. So it reminds me of that imagery from Sleeping Beauty last week of these princes who came at the wrong time and all dying on the thorn bushes. It's a bit like that, these fetuses trying to implant themselves and not doing very well. Okay, so if the pregnancy doesn't get established, we've got all this possibly dying infective tissue, all this stuff left over, hormonal signals. Get rid of it. Just get rid of it. If the pregnancy is not established, the progesterone kicks in, get rid of it. Start again. Clean sheet. So it makes perfect sense with these species, hemocorial placental mammals, spontaneous decidualization, this build-up of the endometrium, irrespective of whether the female's pregnant or not, and continuous receptivity, which raises these issues of chromosomal abnormalities. Okay. So that is how these colleagues, Emmer, Romero and Wagner, have been explaining the functions of menstruation. It's not really adaptive in itself, it's a necessary consequences of the adaptation of spontaneous decellularization. Now, I'm going to go on to talk about hominin mating systems in just a little moment, but I thought it is worth running this very nice little YouTube, which you can find online. It's a TED YouTube, which explains all that again for you in nice, simple language, just so we can get it exactly what's going on.
A handful of species on Earth share a seemingly mysterious role, a menstrual cycle. We're one of the select few. Monkeys, apes, bats, humans, and possibly elephant shrews are the only mammals on Earth that menstruate. We also do it more than any other animal, even though it's a waste of nutrients and can be a physical inconvenience. So where's the sense in this uncommon biological process? The answer begins with pregnancy. During this process, the body's resources are cleverly used to shape a suitable environment for a fetus, creating an internal haven for a mother to nurture her growing child. In this respect, pregnancy is awe-inspiring, but that's only half the story. The other half reveals that pregnancy places a mother and her child at odds. As for all living creatures, the human body evolved to promote the spread of its genes. For the mother, that means she should try to provide equally for all her offspring. But a mother and her fetus don't share exactly the same genes. The fetus inherits genes from its father as well, and those genes can promote their own survival by extracting more than their fair share of resources from the mother. This evolutionary conflict of interests places a woman and her unborn child in a biological tug-of-war that plays out inside the womb. One factor contributing to this internal tussle is the placenta, the fetal organ that connects to the mother's blood supply and nourishes the fetus while it grows. In most mammals, the placenta is confined behind a barrier of maternal cells. This barrier lets the mother control the supply of nutrients to the fetus. But in humans and a few other species, the placenta actually penetrates right into the mother's circulatory system to directly access her bloodstream. Through its placenta, the fetus pumps the mother's arteries with hormones that keep them open to provide a permanent flow of nutrient-rich blood. A fetus with such unrestricted access can manufacture hormones to increase the mother's blood sugar, dilate her arteries, and inflate her blood pressure. Most mammal mothers can expel or reabsorb embryos if required, but in humans, once the fetus is connected to the blood supply, severing that connection can result in hemorrhage. If the fetus develops poorly or dies, the mother's health is endangered. As it grows, a fetus's ongoing need for resources can cause intense fatigue, high blood pressure, and conditions like diabetes and preeclampsia. Because of these risks, pregnancy is always a huge and sometimes dangerous investment. So it makes sense that the body should screen embryos carefully to find out which ones are worth the challenge. This is where menstruation fits in. Pregnancy starts with a process called implantation, where the embryo embeds itself in the endometrium that lines the uterus. The endometrium evolved to make implantation difficult, so that only the healthy embryos could survive. But in doing so, it also selected for the most vigorously invasive embryos, creating an evolutionary feedback loop. The embryo engages in a complex, exquisitely timed hormonal dialogue that transforms the endometrium to allow implantation. What happens when an embryo fails the test? It might still manage to attach, or even get partly through the endometrium. As it slowly dies, it could leave its mother vulnerable to infection. And all the time, it may be emitting hormonal signals that disrupt her tissues. The body avoids this problem by simply removing every possible risk. Each time ovulation doesn't result in a healthy pregnancy, the womb gets rid of its endometrial lining, along with any unfertilized eggs sick, dying, or dead embryos. That protective process is known as menstruation, leading to the period. This biological trait, bizarre as it may be, sets us on course for the continuation of the human race.
I'm not sure that was what it was for, but anyway. What about the elephant shrew race? Okay. Right, so maybe doing that. So that's kind of nice little synopsis there. In terms of thinking about the sheer quantities ourselves, we are as a champion menstruators, but also chimps and great apes probably have rather more menstruation than other species. And it's probably connected to this arms race between the more the endometrium gets tough and thick, and the more that there's an arms race of the fetus therefore having to become more invasive, and that is probably the key factor, but it isn't fully explained yet, and there's still more to understand. But what I now want to do is to then consider menstruation clearly didn't evolve as a signal. It's not communicative, but it became that. And I'm going to consider what role it played in hominin mating systems. Now, I'm putting up this data here with specific human cultures, the Dogon from Mali and Kalasha from Hindu Kush areas, because we've got to recognize that us women in Western cultural conditions, Western social conditions, we are not typical of most of the human race. We are very atypical and very weird, as it's known, Western educated, industrial rich, so-called democratic, as we are. And populations where, how is menstruation experienced in natural fertility populations where there is no, contraceptives being disrupting normal sort of fertility conditions. Now, neither of these populations is hunter-gatherer, they're horticulturist, agriculturalist. However, that wouldn't very greatly alter the parameters here. It would be still pretty representative for hunter-gatherers fundamentally. So this has been measured in slightly different ways. Dogon taking women at peak reproductive age for over a 2-year period to measure, well, how many of those women are experiencing menstrual cycles rather than actual physical menstruation. They're going through menstrual cycles. How many then pregnant, how many, this is really referring to the energetically heaviest part of breastfeeding, which is so energetically heavy that it suppresses ovulation, okay? So we're getting, in both populations, roughly 1/8 of the time a woman is experiencing menstruating cycles. Roughly between 30% and 40%, so it's around a third, a bit more than a third of the time, actually being pregnant, okay, of her whole reproductive lifespan, actually being pregnant. And then for 60%, half of the time of her whole reproductive lifespan in heavy breastfeeding that's suppressing ovulation, okay. Now, if we thought of this as a model for hominins, our hominin ancestry, well, the oldest hominins would be going back to great apes, would be more like great apes. Now, a great ape here would increase the amount of lactation massively. And there's one simple reason for that. Great apes have very long interbirth intervals because a great ape mother does the entire job by herself. She gets no help from anyone. In fact, she may be hindered by them rather than helped. So she is doing the entire job of getting that offspring up and running to the point it's independent of her lactation. So a great ape would have longer and therefore relatively fewer or relatively less proportion of cycling, longer breastfeeding, roughly similar in pregnancy probably. Now, as hominins go back to great apes, it is likely that they were, I'm thinking of Australopithecines and earlier than about 3 million years ago, probably this pattern of longer breastfeeding. Why can these populations are typical of all human cultural populations, that they have cooperative breeding. There's somebody who steps in to help the mother, and offspring are weaned at an earlier age than any great ape, and then the child, a human child, is something special. It's a unique life history phase, actually. A human child does not yet have teeth that can process an adult diet, but it can be fed by others other than the mother, and this enables the mother to make this short breastfeeding period. So this is probably characteristic of genus Homo. This kind of proportion of time breastfeeding probably kicks in with genus Homo about 2 million years ago, is what it is. Now, we have made the point that continuous sexual receptivity is one of the key factors that seems to be significant amongst the species that menstruate, and without any question it would have been significant amongst the hominins. Now, if we think of primates in general, so we have monkeys and apes generally menstruating, though not maybe in such quantities as us. They also have significant amounts of extended sexual receptivity, and if we look at the reasons in monkey and ape mating systems, why does continuous receptivity evolve? The number one reason is to counter infanticide. The example species there would be the langur monkeys, those temple monkeys that you see in the Indian temples, the Hanuman langurs, which is a species very susceptible to male takeovers of harems, and then the males kill the offspring of females, and then they mate those females within a few days to get them pregnant with their own genes. Okay. Now, females fight back, and one of the key ways that females try to fight back is by using their sexuality, by being proceptive and getting males to mate them even when they are not near their ovulation or fertility. Even when they're pregnant, they try to mate males to confuse the males about whether or not they could be fathers. If a male has mated a female and he could be a father, he will not kill the offspring. If he hasn't mated that female, he'll be ruthless. Okay, so langur monkeys are using that tactic, and that's a typical monkey tactic to counter infanticide, and having the ability to extend sexuality around the cycle is behind that. Now, that reason for continuous sexual receptivity, which seems to connect to menstruation, would be going back. So this is a chart that's going to 3 million years. We've got our Australopithecine species. I'm sorry, it's not very clear. So all these great ape-like bipedal hominins earlier, back before 3 million years ago, almost surely would have had a continuous receptivity with hiding of ovulation for the simple reason of anti-infanticide. Chimps and bonobos have big estrus signals, but what they do with those is mate every male in the band to prevent infanticide. They don't have infanticide because they mate everybody. Okay. In our case, it's more like concealment. Okay, so that's our first reason for. The second, if you have this continuous receptivity and concealed ovulation, it can then be used for the next step, the next reason that hominins in particular required, and this was to keep males hanging around in the hope that the males could begin to be useful. Okay. With great apes, males aren't any much use at all. They do protect offspring, that's the best thing they can do, but they're not a lot of use to the female, certainly not in terms of helping her with energy. But at some stage, and it has to be here with this 2 million years, and the reason it has to be here is because we are seeing a jump from the Australopithecine chimpanzee level of brain size, and it jumps to twice as much at about 2 million, somewhere in there. We don't know the fossils exactly there, but it's somewhere in there, jumping 2 million years. Now, that jump represents a huge energy burden on the mother. It's a huge extra, because this is brain expansion, much bigger brain volume, and it's extremely expensive to raise large-brained offspring. Very expensive indeed. So somewhere this is the level that great apes or Australopithecines by themselves can raise offspring of that brain size. This has been called a grey ceiling. We smashed through there. And the reason we smashed through there is we got help, the females got help from others. First of all, that's likely to be their mothers, because the mums, the grandmother hypothesis, the mums are the most reliable. But somewhere along the line, males started to be useful. Put up the shelves, go to the grocers, bring back the odd thing, just a bit useful. Doesn't mean they're too committed, just means they start getting helpful, because if they're helpful, they might get more matings and so forth. Now, so conceal ovulation, continue your receptivity around the cycle. If you've got your mum helping you, you can shorten your interbirth intervals. She can take that little child off your hands a bit. That means you're menstruating more, menstrual cycles more than these grade 8 guys. And okay, these males are starting to they have to hang around. If you aren't showing the sign when you're fertile, if you are you're continuously sexually receptive, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He's happy, keeps there, stays around. So continuous sexual receptivity is building potential pair bonding. We haven't necessarily got very committed pair bonding here. That's going to come later with this extraordinary rise here. So this second 2 times chimp level could operate with cooperative breeding, grandmothers, family members, siblings, all helping mum, and males popping around and being a bit useful and helping out, protecting groups, protecting offspring, offering a certain amount of, we're doing quite a lot of meat eating, there's quite a lot of meat procurement at this stage already. And continuous sexual receptivity is the bedrock for that. Okay, but let's just see where menstruation now. I've said there must be more menstruations going on relative to grade 8s already by then. Okay, so now what's going to happen? The evidence of our sexual cycles is evidence of what happened with our ancestors. Okay, so we've got this. Concealed ovulation, continuous receptivity, scrambles the information to males about exactly when a female's fertile. The last thing any female wants to know, let a male know, is the moment she's fertile, because if she does that, okay, wham bam, thank you ma'am, off to the next one. Okay, I'm talking about hominins here, okay. But what about menstruation? Now menstruation is now something very interesting. It is the only cue that tells a female's definitely not pregnant, which implies she can be made pregnant. So amongst a whole group where females are pregnant, lactating, menopausal, so we saw those figures from the Dogger and the Kalasha. Only a small proportion of females are experiencing menstrual cycles at any one time, and my God, are the males going to be interested in knowing which ones? Yes, this menstruation, highly visible, highly salient, so a signal like menstruation in a Darwinian world is impossible for any male to ignore. It is a huge giveaway of information. Okay. Now, this implies that any female who's menstruating, is likely to use that signal, use the fact that she's menstruating to attract attention of males. And she might choose particular males. She might choose some male who thinks he's, God's gift. She might think he's the best one. Let's flash at him. And she will attract his attention and potentially take his attentions away from other females. Menstruation is therefore disruptive, competitive, potentially, because it is this signal of imminent fertility, and it is the one signal that really is guaranteeing potential imminent fertility. It doesn't signal fertility now. In the near future, it's saying this female's not pregnant, she can be made pregnant. Okay. Now, that problem, so menstruation is going to become a problem. Let's just go back on the chart. so long as we have a relatively level, we're talking about Homo erectus in this period up to about 1 million years ago, so long as we've got it relatively steady, gradient on the brain, we're relying on grandma, sisters, maybe brothers, your younger offspring. Males are helpful a bit, but we don't rely on them. Mates are helpful a bit, we don't rely on them terribly. Brothers may be more helpful. That'll work, but then what happens when we hit this? So this is happening about 700,000 years ago, and this is just extraordinary. It's the species known as Heidelbergensis most of the time these days. A typical fossil specimen would be Bodo from Ethiopia. 3 times the volume of brain size compared to a chimpanzee. Incredibly expensive, and it just goes up and up and up to the point where we and Neanderthals, we talk about Neanderthals, are speciating. Okay, now when that starts to happen, there is so much pressure on females in terms of the energies they need. They have to find more from somewhere, and having, these scarlet women, menstrual hussies running about trying to grab attention from alpha males is no longer going to be a viable proposition. This is where some serious pair bonding in context, and why those brain sizes are rising must be to do with enlarging social group networks, is the social brain says. So how do you secure male-female relationships on a reliable basis against an increasing multi-male, multi-female background? That's probably part of this huge increase. This is a kind of arms race increase in brain size. Okay, so let's just take a look at it. This is the problem. As soon as we've got this menstrual hussy here with his other pregnant, heavily burdened, lactating females or menopausal females, it's causing conflict between the females. They may be friends and relatives, but even so, she's drawing the attention of males who are possible partners of these ones immediately, and then it causes conflict amongst the males. There's no question why menstruation is the key signal here. Is that clear enough? So they've got to do something about it, and it's the female problem. It's the females who have to do something about it. The males aren't going to sort this out. It's got to be the females who do. The females are the ones who have the energy burdens and have to produce the energy to raise offspring. So, well, first of all, they've got to make sure, that girl, that hussy, needs to be got under control. She can't be allowed to just run off with some alpha male because she fancies him. So yeah, let's get her under control. She's probably their own relative because they're likely to be living in female related coalitions. And then what? You've got 2 choices what to do. And basically I'm going to make the bold claim that every human culture on earth has made one of these 2 choices about what to do about menstruation. Every single culture. And you can think about the different ways that that's been tackled. It has been tackled in many different ways. But there's basically 2 choices. You hide it, suppress it, pretend it's not there and ignore it, which might be very difficult in the hominin circumstances because of its very significant visibility. You try to hide it, which is like concealing ovulation, like not giving information away. Or you do the opposite of that, and I am saying that in early modern humans and their preceding species, this is what they did. They took menstruation and they amplified it cosmetically through whatever elaboration, amplified means they could, exaggerated it, made it into this big signal for the set to, one, confuse, but also maximally get the attention of the males, and get the attention in terms of, with a view to getting those males to perform labour for that whole female coalition. Okay, so let's just think about the actual interest of the females in there and the interest of the males in there. This whole talk is governed by evolutionary struggles of interest, conflicts of interest. We've had the conflicts of interest between mothers and fetus. Well, here we have a conflict of interest between males and females, but not all males and not all females have the same interests. Okay, we're likely to be related females here very strongly, so a probable kin bond. It doesn't have to be relatives, but there's likely to be strong components of female kin. And in addition, of course, there are males who are the relatives of these females. There are men who are brothers and sons of these females. Now their side, if they're going to take a side, they're going to side here. They're going to be in support of those females. Yep. Amongst the males, there is not just the same. There are going to be males who, they want to be the alpha. They want to get, they know, oh, she's the one who's menstruating. I want her. Let's get her and take her off on safari. But the other males, the ones who are willing to invest, the ones who are willing to go hunting and bring back stuff for this coalition, they have no interest in common with that alpha male whatsoever. And in fact, they have every interest in going along with this strategy. Every interest. Because what these females are doing, this is a process of sexual selection, which is actually assortative, and which probably is part of our speciation. What these females are doing is saying no to any alpha who's trying to get sex with a menstrual female without doing work. These guys, the guys who are willing to invest, they don't want to have alpha males who are going to get sex for nothing. They want to do their work, do bride service is what it's called in African hunter-gatherer societies, bring back the provisions for the female coalition, and then one of them will be getting the access to the young menstrual female. Okay, so let's actually see. So this is what we call, that's that whole process I've called female cosmetic coalitions. This picket line of cosmetically decorated females saying no to any alpha male who's trying to pick and choose between them. The saying no to all the males corresponds absolutely to Chris Knight's sex drive theory that he was explaining a couple of weeks ago. It's just been Darwinized. We've got some proper sexual selection theory in there and so forth. We just made it more respectable in terms of biology. But it's exactly the same thing in principle. Okay. And now we can see it in being modelled in action. The Himba, I hasten to add, they're not hunter-gatherers, but they model so beautifully the use of ochre paint. And this is actually a ceremony preceding a wedding going on with the Himba. And we're seeing the sort of, what is that coalition? We're seeing the work being put into the grinding of the ochres, the paint, the war paint that they're putting on here. We see also these shell jewels that I'll talk about a little bit later. But they are working together as a collective cosmetic body with their body paint. Clearly, the message going across to males is, you don't mess with us, when we're ready for you. If we think of that Sleeping Beauty again, this is like the picket line around the forest, around the Sleeping Beauty. When we're ready for you, okay, but you wait till then. And meanwhile, these women are actually dancing with a mating dance that resembles cattle, because they are cattle owning, livestock owning. But hunter-gatherers would be dancing, and I will show you by the end, I hope, dancing with the game animals, the pantomime of the game animals that they want the men to go and hunt. And the message should get across very, very clearly. That, so they become the wrong sex and the wrong species. They are saying no to the men absolutely clearly. This is not the time for sex. You're going to do what you need to do to get the sex. So our predictions from female cosmetic coalitions or sex strike hypothesis, the major prediction, I'll just show a little bit of, I've only got 10 minutes, so I wanted to have some dog and cosmology. Well, it's about 10, isn't it? Give us 50. Okay, our earliest evidence, this states clearly that our earliest evidence of symbolic behaviour, the earliest durable materials used for signalling in human culture, will be a cosmetics industry that is specifically focused on blood red pigments. And the time period of that emergence will correlate with the encephalization, the increase of brain size, because that is when females have the maximum pressure on their reproductive energy budgets. Okay, and the rest of this will come if I've got any time. Cosmologies that emerge out of this will be linked to menstruation and the moon, especially. We'll see if I get time to talk about that. Okay, just a little bit on the archaeology for a few minutes, and I'm owing this to my colleague Ian Watts, who is the main archaeologist of ochre. He's the most knowledgeable guy about the ochre record of the African Middle Stone Age, and we're looking across, so this is 100,000 years. This is the period of early modern human speciation back to Jebel Uhud in Morocco some 300,000 years ago, to the Ethiopian fossils Omo Hairto from 200 to 150,000, and we can see very saturated red ochres. Ochres are iron oxides. There are many different geological forms. They're iron oxides which can take an array of colours, but the colour that is above all selected in African Middle Stone Age context is a very vivid blood or saturated red colour. Blombos and Klazis and Pinnacle Point are all South African coastal sites. Twin Rivers, Zambia, Catherine back to Kenya. In fact, there is stuff earlier which Ian has been involved in the documentation of. So we're looking at, I'm going to make the claim that this is one of the famous engraved pieces of ochre from the Blombos site of about 70,000 years old. There's actually no other evolutionary explanation for what is all that ochre doing in the African Middle Stone Age. We have the only actual explanation for it. Big claim, but I think it's true. These are pieces of the engraved ochres in Blombos. That's very dim. We could have a better, but that is shaped as a crayon. These don't look very bright, but as soon as you grind into them, the red is vivid. It becomes vivid, and if you mix that with water or fat, it's really bright. It's beautiful. And this is like a crayon that can apply or be ground very fine, or apply to design to very finely. This is ground ochre, just showing you the colour from Pinnacle Point, a very advanced site for about 160,000 years on the southern African coast. This is Ian's work to show the time period. This is referring to Border Cave, which is an inland site in Transvaal. Where is it? I'm not exactly sure. North Transvaal somewhere. And there's a big jump. So this is before 200,000. This is about 150,000. There is a big jump happening in relation exactly to the time of our speciation of the earliest modern humans. Okay. And this is the finally very exciting site that I'd just like to show you, Van der Werk Cave from the Northern Cape. Now this is even earlier than 300,000. It is not even the Middle Stone Age, it precedes. It's an industry known as forest smith, which is transitional between the Acheulean of the Homo erectus bifaces and the African Middle Stone Age. Forest smith is about 500 to 300,000 years old. Now this giant cave, Van der Werk, is from the system of an ancient river, and it became a mine working, but it is a vast, like an aircraft hangar space deep inside the hillside, and inside that space have been found exotics which are anthropogenic pigments, particularly specularite and hematite. Correlated with that are very advanced prepared core tools, are stone-tipped, the very first stone-tipped spears from 500,000 years ago, almost. Now just let's have a look at this, because these are really the oldest. They look like lumps of rock, but they are really the oldest cosmetics of human culture, the very oldest pieces of anthropogenic pigment. Now these are specularite here, the glittery, which is also hematite, a form of iron oxide that grinds with a red powder, but it has this special sparkle. And this is a real hematite with the red. The colours aren't fantastic with the light there, but possibly up to 500,000 years old. So with species preceding modern humans. Now, the thing that makes spectrolites so interesting is archaeologists who don't like the menstruation explanation, and there's lots of them, I can promise you, they try to find ways that you can explain the use of hematite as ochres in tools for hafting, and they want to have another explanation. But when it comes to speculite, you can't find another explanation. It's display. There's nothing else it's used for. So inside that deep, dark cavern of Wunderwerk, nearly 500,000 years ago, were some forms of ritual activity with firelight. You had to have some artificial light down there. Display activity that we can only start to call ritual. And what we're getting is ritual and cultural activities driving the actual biology of the origins of Homo sapiens. Okay, it's what we're getting, and it starts with this. Yeah. Right, I have 5 minutes. Well, 5 or 10. Let's give it a go. I just want to. I've given you my story of the emergence of menstrual signalling as the basis for ritual and symbolic culture in the earliest modern humans and even their preceding ancestry. We can talk about Neanderthals if you want to talk about Neanderthals as well. There are. But where does all that go to if we consider, we consider menstrual taboos and their ubiquity. There is little doubt that menstruation as this taboo, powerful signal is, it is very ancient that there have been taboos and cosmologies built around menstruation. Now, why pick on the dogon? I mentioned dogon previously, the dogon population and the women's reproductive cycles, because we had back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, a most extraordinary, it was a giant French imperialist, colonialist adventure to Dogon country, then the French Sudan, to find out everything possible, like the total social facts of Dogon culture. And we have a fantastic record of, it's all in French, but we can get quite a bit of translation. Famous book, a famous paperback, Conversations with Ogotomeli by Marcel Griot, who led this expedition, gets you right into it. Now, this cosmology of traditional African religion, totally pagan African religion, seeps with menstrual blood. I could give an entire lecture on this, but I'll give you a few salient points about it. But in addition to that, all that material from the traditional Dogon cosmology, we also have a fantastic research project on the biology of menstruation done with women of the Dogon who are natural fertility population. And this is done by Beverly Strassman and her colleagues particularly. Okay, so let's just take the biology first. So Beverly Strassman is very interesting. This is a beautiful Dogon menstrual hut. The menstrual hut smack in the village, in the middle of the village. Everyone can see women going in and out of the menstrual hut. Okay, so first thing that Beverly Strassman wants to find out is, are those women really menstruating when they go to the menstrual hut? And she checks it out with hormonal assays, and it turns out, yes, they are. They go to the hut because they really are menstruating. They're not cheating, they're doing it. And they are highly visible. The fact that they are going to the hut is completely visible. Now what Strassman wants to do with that is she starts to discuss the role of menstrual taboos, the function of menstrual taboos amongst the Dogon. And what she thinks is happening is men, by keeping track of, particularly the polygynous husbands of the women, by keeping track of when women are where they are in their menstrual cycle, are guarding themselves against cuckoldry, making sure that no other guy gets their wife pregnant. Okay, so what they do, so they're watching now, because the husband's polygynous, he might not be able to, he might not notice one wife pregnant, menstruating, whilst he's busy with another wife, and then so he might not see it all. So by making them go through this process of the menstrual hut, it's visible. But then you could ask, well, why does the husband want all these other men? I mean, it's so public, like the whole village to see. Now then you look at Dogon kinship and the economy. The Dogon are arranged into patrilineages, very formal patrilineages. It's very patriarchal culture. And the patrilineages hold land, vital land resources. Land is very limited in Dogon, the Dogon escarpments. There are population who have run away into very remote country historically from slave raiding to escape. And they're in very remote parts with little usable agricultural land. The patrilineages hold that land. So now who are the women signalling to when they're going to the menstrual hut? They're telling the other men of the patrilineage, they're showing that they really are menstruating. Therefore, if the husband is having sex with that woman directly after menstruation and keeping track of her, that should be a true patrilineal. The child should be true as an inheritor of the patrilineage, and therefore, if that child inherits resources of the patrilineage, that's good. Okay, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Strassman went on with her colleagues to do something phenomenal, which was extraordinary, which I'm amazed they gave her permission to do. She tracked with DNA paternity testing the degrees of cuckoldry. She's trying to find out how many times have Dogon wives actually cuckolded their husbands. Wow. And she divides her group into those that follow traditional Dogon religion, who use the menstrual huts, those where they become Islamic converts, and there is certain amount of menstrual observance in the Islamic population, but not menstrual hut visits, and the Christian Dogon. So she's comparing these three groups, and she predicts that, because the Christians, this is a feature of Christianity which we can discuss in the questions, why do the Christians suppress any knowledge of menstruation, which is what Christian culture does? Christians don't do any menstrual observance. Christians get cuckolded more. The Islamic population get cuckolded in intermediate amount because they do have a certain amount of menstrual observance. The menstrual hut visits are really seeming to protect against cuckoldry. So she's actually demonstrated her thesis there. But what she hasn't demonstrated is this. She hasn't explained anything about this and about the amazing symbolism. So I've said menstruation is like this interface of the biology and the symbolism in association with that. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit. I won't have much chance to say much here, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this. So Dogon initiation for both sexes, for a young woman, a young girl and a boy coming to puberty, involves circumcision. Clitoridectomy for the girl, circumcision for the boy. Okay. In Dogon concept of gender is that every person has twin soul, is androgynous. So a woman has a masculine part and the boy has a feminine part, and they come to their initiation with this double sex. It's a bit like wrong sex. They both have this. Now in the clitoridectomy for the Dogons, harsh clitoridectomy with excision, the masculine part is meant to be cut away, the clitoris is cut away, and this portrayal on the menstrual hut is of the prototype ancestress Yesigwi with her clitoris, and she was the first one to be clitoridectomized. Okay, so it's referring to the menstrual hut's referring to that. In the boy's circumcision, the prepuce of the penis is supposed to be the female part being cut away. So he's confirmed as male, she's confirmed as female. Okay, but every time a woman goes back to the menstrual hut, she revisits her masculine aspect. This is why this is above the entrance. She's possessed by a male animal. Just by virtue of her menstruation, she becomes this. Now, this sounds like the wrong sex to me. And the boys with the circumcision are described as having their periods. It's not only the circumcised boys, so we get a sex role swapping around with the menstrual hut visits, the women getting masculized, the boys with the circumcision getting feminized. Now, it's not only circumcision, it is also this extraordinary, the fibres that are used in the skirts of the magnificent, the very famous tourist spectacles, the Dogon masquerades. Men who dye this red fibre, special skirts, the red dyes, are men having their periods. And any woman is never supposed to come close to the masks or the skirts. If she does, she will die by bleeding continuously, by bleeding and never stopping. The story of the skirts is a perfect example of the matriarchy myths that Chris was telling us about a couple of lectures ago. That the first fibre skirt was stained with the world's first menstrual flow. And the world's first menstrual flow came from an incestuous act of a mother and a son. Okay. And women were the first to have the masks and the skirts and the dye. Of course, that's like the matriarchy myths that Chris told us. A particular woman was a queen who reigned tyrannically, and she destroyed the country. She was tyrannical over men. She had this skirt of terror, this great red skirt of total terror, until the men finally were able to capture this skirt, take it away from her. There's a whole long involved story that I could tell you in a longer lecture, but the men got the skirts from the women. They got the part. Now, nothing in Beverly Strassman's analysis can tell us what on earth is going on. If Dogon culture regards menstruation with such negativity, with such, that it's so polluting, that women are so polluted that they must go to the hut, the men are taking over the signal and appropriating this signal of menstruation as this ritual form of solidarity. I'm going to leave the last word with Ogotameli here, the great informer of, if I can find his quote, because he told this to Masagrio. When men wear the fibre skirts, it's as if they're dressing up as women, for this dress represents female sexual parts. Furthermore, when they dress like this, they represent not women in general, but pregnant women. So circumcised boys at the first stage of Dogon male initiation are menstruating, and the men in their full regalia of the masquerade in the famous Dogon funeral rituals are pregnant. They're pregnant with the entire society, and in order to be pregnant they must wear the skirts that have the first menstrual flow. I'm not going to have time now to explain this, because I'll do this later again in the Ice Age art. The Dogon are not hunter-gatherers, and here we are looking at the signal of menstruation and its implications amongst hunter-gatherers with this rock art painting. It's actually a depiction of probably one of the world's oldest rituals, something equivalent to the Elam bull dance, which is well known in the Kalahari. But it is also a picture that's equivalent to the Sleeping Beauty from last week. We have the girl, this is the menstrual hut, and the Sleeping Beauty, and around her all the women dancing a dance in the form of mating elans, and they're using horns here to poke and keep the men away, so the hunters have to take away all their weapons. The taboos that are being represented, the menstrual taboos being represented in this picture are, this girl is totally unavailable to her sexually, so are all the women unavailable sexually, because they're elans mating with the girl as the elan bull. So these men, there's actually bars on their penises to represent that sexual taboo. Also, the weapons cannot touch. The girl can't come anywhere near the weapons, because the weapons would be the poison of the weapons would be destroyed. These are typical hunter-gatherer menstrual taboos. But instead of it being the case, as in the Dogon patriarchy, that a menstruating woman cannot come close to the sacred precincts, this is the sacred precinct. This, where the Sleeping Beauty lies, is it. And her sacredness is such that she provides, her menstrual blood provides the rocket fuel of the entire community to take them up into what is known as first creation. It's like the time beyond time, the Bushman version of dreaming, the time where there is no sickness or death, where people have eland heads. Where have we got an eland head somewhere? I got there. People have eland heads, and all of them travel together into first creation with the rocket fuel of that girl's menstrual flow, being organized through this ritual perspective. Now, this panel, I'm very confident it does represent a girl's first menstruation ritual, the Elam Bull Dance, but the great rock art specialist David Lewis Williams subsequently backed off that interpretation and said, no, actually it's a healing dance, which is a very famous ritual of the Kalahari Bushmen as well. But actually there's no real difference. The potency of menstruation, because this is not about pollution, this is about power and potency. The potency of menstruation of the girl in this ritual context carries people into first creation. The healers going into their altered states of consciousness similarly carry people through to first creation. They are all the same process. They're like two sides of the same coin. So menstruation is at the absolute foundation. Menstruation itself is not the symbol, because menstruation is the gold standard. It always has value. It is signifying imminent fertility. It's always valuable. But onto that are built all these symbolic elaborations, and basically all human religions will track back to that in some form. I think that's enough.